Life changes in unexpected ways. One moment you're folding shirts in your family's small clothing store, dreaming of something more, and the next you're watching your father throw your accounting textbooks onto the wet pavement outside. I was 22 when it happened. The daughter who was supposed to carry on the family business, not the one who dared to want more. Our store, Fashion Corner, had been my parents' pride and joy for 25 years. They'd built it from nothing after immigrating to America, turning a tiny shop in a rundown strip mall into a moderately successful business. It wasn't much, but it was their everything. "Emily, fold these properly." Mom would snap, redoing my work for the 100th time. "How will you run this store if you can't even fold a simple sweater?" That was the thing. I never wanted to run the store. Don't get me wrong. I respected what my parents had built. I understood their sacrifice, the countless hours they'd worked to give me a better life. But their dream wasn't mine. I still remember the day I first saw the night class flyer at the community college. Associate's degree in accounting. Evening classes available. My hands trembled as I took a photo of it with my phone. For weeks after, I'd lie awake at night, imagining a different future than the one my parents had planned. It took me 3 months to gather the courage to enroll. 3 months of secretly saving every tip, every extra dollar I could squeeze from my store salary. My plan was simple: work at the store during the day, take classes at night, and somehow make it all work. For 2 months, I managed to keep it hidden. I'd leave the store at 6 p.m., claiming I was meeting friends or going to the gym. Instead, I'd rush to my accounting classes, heart pounding with equal parts exhaustion and excitement. For the first time in my life, I felt alive, challenged, like I was moving towards something instead of standing still. Then came the night that changed everything. I was in the middle of my advanced accounting class when my phone started buzzing. 20 missed calls from my parents. A customer had seen me walking into the college and mentioned it to my mother. By the time I got home, they were waiting. "What is this?" Dad demanded, holding up my course schedule that he found in my bag. His face was that particular shade of red I'd only seen a few times in my life. When we'd been robbed last year, when my brother told them he was moving to Europe for a job. "I can explain," I started, but Mom cut me off. "Explain what?" "That you're wasting your time with useless classes instead of learning the business. That you're throwing away everything we built for you." "I'm not throwing anything away," I protested. "I can do both. Work here during the day, study at night." "No." Dad's fist came down on the counter so hard the register rattled. "You choose right now. The store or these foolish classes." I looked at them both, my mother's disappointed face, my father's anger, and for the first time in my life, I chose myself. "The classes," I whispered. The silence that followed was deafening. "Then get out." Dad's voice was cold, final. He walked to my workstation, grabbed my accounting textbooks, and threw them through the front door onto the rain-soaked sidewalk. "If education is more important than family, then go. Don't come back until you've learned your place." Mom didn't say a word. She just turned her back, straightening a rack of dresses as if I'd already disappeared. I gathered my soaked books from the pavement, mascara running down my face as I tried to save the pages. My whole life was in that store, but as I watched my parents lock the door behind me, I realized something important. It wasn't the life I wanted. That night, I slept on my best friend Sophia's couch, my wet textbooks spread out on her coffee table to dry. "You can stay as long as you need," she said, bringing me a cup of tea and a blanket. "But what's your plan?" I stared at my books, their pages wrinkled, but still readable. I'm going to finish what I started, I said finally. I have to. The next few months were the hardest of my life. I found a job as a bookkeeper's assistant at a small firm, barely making enough to split rent with Safia. Every morning, I'd walk past Fashion Corner on my way to work, watching my parents open up through the big front windows. They never looked up, never acknowledged me. It was like I'd ceased to exist. My brother James tried to mediate at first. Just apologize, he'd say during our secret coffee meetings. Tell them you made a mistake. They'll forgive you. But I hadn't made a mistake. Every night in class, every practice problem I solved, every concept I mastered, it all felt right in a way that folding clothes never had. 1 year turned into 2. I finished my associate's degree with honors and immediately enrolled in a bachelor's program. My entry-level bookkeeping job became a junior accountant position. I moved out of Safia's place into a tiny studio apartment of my own. Still, every morning, I'd walk past the store. Mom and Dad were always there, working just as hard as they had when I was a child. The strip mall around them was changing. Stores closing, new ones opening, rents rising with each passing year. But Fashion Corner remained frozen in time, exactly as I remembered it, until the day I saw the notice posted on the building's main entrance. No TIC of SAALE, prime retail location. All inquiries to Maxwell Real Estate Group. My heart stopped. The whole strip mall was being sold. What would happen to my parents' store? To their dream? I knew from my morning walks that business hadn't been great lately. The neighborhood was gentrifying, and Fashion Corner's outdated inventory and tired storefront stood out like a relic from another era. That night, I couldn't sleep. My parents might have thrown me out, but they were still my parents. The store might not have been my dream, but it was theirs. And now, after 25 years, they might lose everything. I pulled out my laptop and started researching. Property records, tax assessments, market values. Numbers had become my language, and what they told me wasn't good. The strip mall was undervalued, and any new owner would likely double or triple the rents to match market rates. My parents would never be able to afford it. I sat there in my tiny apartment, surrounded by textbooks and financial statements, and made a decision that would change all our lives forever. I just didn't know it yet. The next morning, I called Maxwell Real Estate Group. The receptionist almost dismissed me until I mentioned I was interested in purchasing, not leasing. Suddenly, her tone changed. Miss Carter? Yes, Mr. Maxwell can see you tomorrow at 9 a.m. I looked at my bank account that night. 5 years of aggressive saving and smart investments had left me with a decent nest egg, but nowhere near enough to buy a commercial property. Still, I put on my best suit, the one I'd bought to celebrate my promotion to senior accountant, and walked into that meeting like I belonged there. Robert Maxwell was exactly what you'd expect from a successful real estate broker. Expensive suit, practiced smile, firm handshake. So, Ms. Carter, you're interested in the Riverside Strip Mall? Yes, I said, forcing myself to meet his gaze. Particularly, the unit currently occupied by Fashion Corner. His eyebrows rose slightly. Interesting choice. That's one of our less profitable units. The current tenants are on a very old lease agreement. Any new owner would want to adjust that to market rates. My stomach clenched. And what are the current market rates? When he named the figure, my blood ran cold. It was triple what my parents were paying. They'd never survive that increase. The entire property is listed at $2.8 million, he continued, sliding a glossy brochure across his desk. "We're expecting significant interest." I took the brochure, my mind racing. $2.8 million might as well have been $28 million. Even with my savings and excellent credit, no bank would give me a loan that size based on my current salary. But I had something else: knowledge. 5 years of accounting work had taught me to read between the lines of financial statements. 3 years of networking had given me contacts in the real estate industry. 2 years of advanced business classes had shown me how to spot opportunities others might miss. "I'd like to see the property's financial records," I said. Maxwell looked surprised, but agreed. For the next week, I spent every free moment analyzing those documents. The previous owner had been neglecting the property for years. Several units were vacant, and the occupied ones were severely under market. The building needed repairs, but nothing structural. Most importantly, the owner was motivated to sell quickly due to health issues. I made some calls. Sophia, now a successful real estate attorney, helped me understand the legal aspects. My old professor from business school introduced me to a group of private investors who specialized in commercial properties. My boss at the accounting firm gave me a glowing reference when the bank started asking questions. 2 weeks later, I walked back into Maxwell's office with a proposal: $2.2 million, with 20% down from a combination of my savings and private investors. The rest would come from a commercial loan backed by the property's potential income once brought up to market rates. "Bold strategy," Maxwell said, reviewing my proposal. "But risky. What makes you think you can turn this property around?" I pulled out my detailed business plan. "Because I understand this neighborhood. I know what it needs, and I know how to provide it." The negotiations took another month. Every night, I'd walk past the store, watching my parents close up shop, unaware that their daughter was fighting to secure their future. Sometimes, Mom would step outside to sweep the sidewalk, and I'd duck into doorways to avoid being seen. It hurt, but I wasn't ready to face them. Not yet. Finally, after what felt like endless meetings, paperwork, and sleepless nights, I had the keys in my hand. I was now the owner of the Riverside Strip Mall, including my parents' store. The first few months were a blur of activity. I hired contractors to repair the roof and update the facade. I brought in a professional property management company to handle day-to-day operations. Most importantly, I made sure all communications with current tenants came from the management company, not me. One by one, I filled the vacant units with carefully selected businesses: a trendy coffee shop, a boutique fitness studio, a local artisan marketplace. The strip mall began to transform, and foot traffic increased dramatically. Then came the moment I'd been both dreading and anticipating. The management company sent out notices to all tenants about the upcoming lease renewals and rent adjustments. I sat in my car across the street the morning I knew my parents would receive the notice. Dad got the mail as he always did at 10 a.m. I watched him open the envelope, saw his face change as he read it. He rushed inside, presumably to show Mom. Through the window, I could see them gesturing frantically, papers spread across the counter where I used to fold clothes. Mom wiped her eyes with her apron. Dad kept shaking his head. That afternoon, they called the number on the notice, not knowing they were calling the management company I'd hired. "Please," I heard Mom say through the recording I'd received later. "We've been here for 25 years. We can't afford triple the rent. Our daughter, she used to help us with the books, but..." Her voice broke. "Is there any way to negotiate?" I sat in my new office, the one with a view of the city skyline. listening to that message over and over. My mother's voice, smaller and more vulnerable than I'd ever heard it, asking for help. The next day, I received an email from the management company. My parents had scraped together every penny they could, trying to offer a counter-proposal. It wasn't nearly enough to match market rates, but they were trying. I stared at their desperate attempt to save their life's work and made another decision. I asked the management company to send them a different kind of letter. 2 days later, I watched through the window as Dad opened this new letter. His hands shook as he read it. Mom grabbed it from him, her eyes widening. The letter offered them a 5-year lease at their current rate, with only minimal annual increases for inflation. The only condition? They had to meet with the new owner in person to sign the paperwork. I scheduled the meeting for a Wednesday morning, deliberately choosing a time I knew they'd be in the store. As I parked my car that day, I caught a glimpse of myself in the rearview mirror. Gone was the scared girl who'd picked up her wet textbooks from the pavement. In her place was a successful businesswoman in a tailored suit, about to change everything. I took a deep breath and walked toward the store that had once been my prison, but had inadvertently set me free. The bell above the door chimed as I walked into Fashion Corner. The sound was exactly as I remembered, a gentle tinkle that had been the soundtrack to my childhood. The store smelled the same too, that mix of new clothes and the lavender air freshener Mom had always loved. "Welcome to Fashion Corner," Mom's voice called out automatically. She was in the back, probably sorting inventory like she did every Wednesday morning. Dad was behind the counter, organizing receipts with the same meticulous care he tried to instill in me. When they looked up and saw me, time seemed to stop. "Emily?" Mom whispered, the stack of sweaters in her arms tumbling to the floor. Dad's face went through a rapid series of emotions: shock, confusion, anger, and something else I couldn't quite read. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, but his voice lacked the authority it had carried 5 years ago. I straightened my shoulders, gripping my leather portfolio like a shield. "I believe you have a meeting scheduled with the new owner of the building." The silence that followed was deafening. Mom's hand flew to her mouth. Dad's face turned that familiar shade of red, but this time I didn't flinch. "You?" he finally managed. "You bought the building?" "Yes." I pulled out the lease papers from my portfolio, laying them on the counter, the same counter where he'd slammed my course schedule 5 years ago. "Shall we discuss the terms?" Mom came forward slowly, like she was approaching a mirage that might disappear. "But how? Remember those useless classes?" I kept my voice professional, even as my heart raced. "Turns out accounting can feed you quite well." Dad picked up the lease with trembling hands. I watched as his eyes scanned the numbers that had once been so foreign to him, the language he dismissed as worthless. This can't be right," he muttered. "These rates, they're your current rates," I confirmed, "with minimal annual increases for inflation. The other tenants are paying market value, triple what you're paying. But for Fashion Corner, I'm offering a special long-term arrangement." "Why?" Mom's voice cracked on the word. I finally let myself really look at them. They'd aged in the past 5 years. Dad's hair was more gray than black now, and Mom's face had new lines I didn't remember. They looked smaller somehow, or maybe I'd just grown bigger. "Because you're my parents," I said simply. "And because this store is your dream. It wasn't mine. It never was. But I respect what you built here." Dad sat heavily in his chair, the lease papers crackling in his grip. "We thought When we got the first notice about the rent increase, we thought we'd lose everything. I know. I pulled out another chair and sat down, maintaining a professional distance despite the urge to close the gap of 5 years. I saw the notice being posted. That's why I bought the building. With what money? Mom asked, still struggling to understand. How could you afford? I worked hard, I said, unable to keep a hint of pride from my voice. I finished my degrees, got promoted, made connections, did everything you taught me about running a business, just not in the way you expected. A tear rolled down Mom's cheek. When you left? When you kicked me out, I corrected gently. Yes, she acknowledged, and the admission seemed to cost her. We thought you were making a terrible mistake. That you'd come back in a few weeks, apologizing. Instead, I built my own life. I finished. One where I could help you keep yours. Dad was still staring at the lease. These terms, we can afford this. We can stay. Yes, you can stay. I stood up, smoothing my skirt. The management company will send someone over this afternoon to finalize the paperwork. Unless, I hesitated, then took the plunge. Unless you prefer to sign them now, with me. The silence stretched between us, 5 years of hurt and pride and stubbornness making it hard to bridge the gap. Then Mom moved, crossing the space between us in 3 quick steps, and pulled me into a hug that smelled of lavender and home. My smart, stubborn girl, she whispered in my ear. I'm so sorry we didn't see. Dad cleared his throat. The books, he said gruffly. For the store. They're a mess since you left. Maybe you could look at them as our landlord? I felt a smile tugging at my lips. How about as your daughter instead? He nodded, and though he didn't hug me like Mom, he did reach out and squeeze my hand, the same hand he'd once slapped an accounting textbook from. We spent the next hour going through the lease, line by line. I explained each clause, each provision, just like I'd learned to do in those night classes they'd once despised. Mom made tea in the back room, using my old mug that she'd apparently never thrown away. As I was leaving, Dad called out, Emily? I turned at the door, the bell chiming above me. Next time, he said, his voice rough with emotion, use the back entrance. No need to wait for opening hours. You still have a key, right? I reached into my purse and pulled out my keychain. Among the new keys to my office, my condo, my car, there was a small brass key I'd never had the heart to remove. Never got rid of it, I said softly. That night, I sat in my office overlooking the city, adding another document to the lease file. A succession plan for Fashion Corner, ensuring that whenever my parents decided to retire, the store would stay in the family. Not because I wanted to run it. That dream had never been mine. But because sometimes protecting someone else's dream is just as important as chasing your own. A week later, Mom called. For the first time in 5 years, I didn't let it go to voicemail. The store numbers for this month, she said, her voice tentative but warm. I was hoping you could come by and look them over. Maybe stay for dinner after. I looked at my desk calendar, at the meetings and appointments that filled my days now. Then I looked at the small brass key on my keychain, the one that had waited 5 years to be used again. I'll come through the back door, I said. Save me some of Dad's dumplings. Her laugh was watery, but real. Always, Emily. Always. As I hung up the phone, I caught my reflection in the office window. Behind me, I could see Fashion Corner's sign glowing in the twilight, looking fresher after the renovations, but still essentially the same. Like us, changed, but still standing, still family. Sometimes the longest journeys lead you right back home, just not in the way anyone expects. 5 years ago, I'd walked away from Fashion Corner with nothing but wet textbooks and a dream. Now I owned the building, had a successful career, and was finally building the relationship with my parents that I'd always wanted. One based on respect rather than obligation. Education hadn't just fed me, it had given me the power to feed us all. The next morning, I used my key in the back door of Fashion Corner. The familiar scent of lavender welcomed me home, and this time, I stayed. Money changes everything. That's what my dad always said when I was growing up, but I never truly understood what he meant until the day my mother died and left me her life insurance policy. I was 24 when it happened. One minute I was a normal young woman working an entry-level marketing job, living in a cramped apartment with 2 roommates, and the next I was a millionaire. Mom had been smart with her investments, smarter than any of us knew. The policy was worth $2.8 million. Dad took it hard when she passed. For months, he barely left the house, barely spoke to anyone. I'd bring him groceries, make sure he ate, try to get him to join the land of the living again. Then he met Victoria. Victoria swept into our lives like a hurricane in designer heels. She was everything my mother wasn't. Loud, flashy, obsessed with status. She was also 15 years younger than my father and worked as a luxury real estate agent. "Your father needs someone to take care of him," she'd say, rearranging the furniture my mother had picked out. "And this house needs a woman's touch." I bit my tongue every time she said things like that. After all, Dad was smiling again, leaving the house, seeming more like his old self. If Victoria made him happy, I could learn to live with her constant jabs and subtle put-downs. Then came the day Dad announced they were getting married. "Isn't it wonderful, Sophie?" He beamed, holding Victoria's hand across the dinner table. "We're going to start a whole new chapter." Victoria's smile was all teeth. "And of course, we'll need a new house to start our new life. Something more suitable." Her eyes swept dismissively around my childhood home, the home my mother had lovingly decorated over 20 years. I should have seen it coming. Within a week, Victoria had convinced Dad to list our house. "The market is hot right now," she argued, "and I've found the perfect place for us." The perfect place turned out to be Oakwood Manor, a sprawling colonial revival mansion in the city's most exclusive neighborhood. Victoria had been trying to sell it for months without success. The price tag of $3.2 million was steep even for that area. "But with your father's savings and the money from this house," she explained, gesturing around my childhood home, "we can almost make it work. We'll just need a small mortgage." I watched Dad nodding along, completely under her spell, and felt my stomach turn. He'd worked so hard his whole life, saved so carefully, and now Victoria was going to burn through it all for a house neither of them could really afford. "Dad," I tried one evening when Victoria wasn't around, "are you sure about this? The maintenance costs alone on a house that size." "Sophie," he cut me off, his voice gentle but firm. "I know what I'm doing. Victoria knows the real estate market. She says this is a solid investment." I wanted to scream that Victoria only knew how to spend money, not save it. That the commission she'd make on selling both houses was clearly clouding her judgment. Instead, I just nodded and kept my concerns to myself. The wedding planning started immediately. Victoria threw herself into it with the same excessive enthusiasm she brought to everything else. No expense was spared. The most expensive venue, the fanciest caterers, the works. It's going to be the event of the season, she'd gush during our forced family dinners. Everyone who's anyone will be there. Then came the day she dropped her bomb. "Sophie, dear," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "about the wedding. I know you're expecting to be part of the bridal party. I wasn't. I'd made no such assumptions. But I've already promised those spots to my nieces. They're much closer to my age, you understand, and they'll look so much better in the photos." I kept my face carefully neutral. "That's fine, Victoria. I understand." "Oh, good." She clapped her hands together. "Because I do have a role for you. You can attend if you serve drinks." The silence that followed was deafening. Even Dad, who usually let Victoria's jabs slide, looked uncomfortable. "Victoria," he started, but she waved him off. "Oh, don't look at me like that. Sophie's always going on about wanting to help, wanting to be involved. Well, this is how she can help. We're short a server, and it would save us some money." I could feel Dad watching me, waiting to see how I'd react. Victoria was smirking, clearly expecting me to refuse, to cause a scene that would paint me as the difficult one yet again. Instead, I smiled. "Of course I'll help, whatever you need." The look of disappointment that flashed across her face was almost worth the humiliation she was trying to inflict. What Victoria didn't know, what no one knew, was that I'd been watching her carefully these past months. I'd seen her showing Oakwood Manor to potential buyers, watched her growing increasingly desperate as each offer fell through. I'd overheard her phone calls about carrying 2 mortgages, about needing this sale to close. Most importantly, I'd noticed how her eyes lit up every time she walked through that house. It wasn't just a commission to her, it was her dream home, the one thing she wanted more than anything else. And thanks to my mother's final gift, I had the power to take it away from her. The next morning, I made a call to my own real estate agent. It was time to make some dreams come true and shatter others into a million expensive pieces. Marcus Green, my real estate agent, looked at me like I'd lost my mind when I told him my plan. "Let me get this straight," he said, leaning back in his chair. "You want to buy Oakwood Manor, the same house your soon-to-be stepmother has listed, and you want to do it through a shell company, so she doesn't know it's you." "Exactly." I pulled out the folder I'd prepared. "Here's proof of funds, pre-approval from the bank, though I won't need it. I can pay cash." His eyebrows shot up as he reviewed the documents. "Sophie, are you sure about this? It's a lot of money to spend on revenge." "It's not just revenge," I argued, though we both knew that was a lie. "It's a sound investment. The property values in that neighborhood have increased 15% annually for the past 5 years. Marcus sighed but started typing on his computer. "All right, let's set up Brighton Holdings LLC. It'll take a few days to get everything in order. But Sophie," he looked at me seriously, "Victoria Carter is one of the top luxury real estate agents in the city. She's going to be furious when she realizes what happened." I smiled. That's the point. The next few weeks were a careful dance of deception. While Victoria wrapped herself in wedding details, I was quietly orchestrating the biggest purchase of my life. Marcus set up meetings with the sellers, making sure they never crossed paths with Victoria's showing schedule. "They're getting desperate," he reported after one meeting. 3 failed deals have them worried. They're willing to take $3 million if we can close quickly. I wrote the check that same day, hands shaking slightly as I signed away more money than I'd ever imagined having. But every time I doubted myself, I remembered Victoria's smirk when she told me to serve drinks at her wedding. Meanwhile, the wedding preparations continued. Victoria dragged Dad to endless tastings, fittings, and planning sessions. I watched his savings account dwindle as she insisted on premium everything. The flowers alone cost more than my first car, he confided one evening, looking worried for the first time. And now with the house. The house? I kept my voice casual. Has something happened? He sighed heavily. Victoria's having trouble selling it. She was counting on that commission to help with the wedding costs. Now she's talking about taking out a second mortgage on our current house to cover everything. My blood boiled. She was going to drain him dry before they even said, "I do." The day before the wedding, Victoria called a final rehearsal at the venue, some overpriced country club she'd chosen. I arrived early, dressed in the server's uniform she'd insisted I wear. "Oh good, you're here," she said, barely glancing at me. "The other servers will show you what to do. Just try not to embarrass me." I spent the next hour learning drink service protocols while Victoria practiced her entrance for the 1,000th time. Her nieces, all perfectly coiffed and coordinated, simpered and praised her every move. "She's going to look amazing tomorrow," one of them gushed, especially in their new house. Victoria preened. "Yes, Oakwood Manor. Did I mention it was featured in Architectural Digest? The crown moldings alone. If you can sell it," another niece said innocently. Victoria's face darkened. "Of course I'll sell it. I have interested buyers. Very interested buyers." I took back a smile. Those interested buyers had just signed the final paperwork an hour ago under the name Brighton Holdings LLC. That night, I could barely sleep. Not because of the wedding, but because of what would happen after. My lawyer had confirmed everything was ready. The timing would be perfect. The next morning dawned bright and clear. I arrived at the country club early, helping set up the bar as Victoria had demanded. She swept in hours later, already in her wedding dress, a monstrosity of tulle and crystals that probably cost more than most people's cars. "Sophie," she barked, "make sure you keep my champagne glass full during the reception. And for heaven's sake, try to stay out of the photos." "Yes, Victoria," I said meekly, straightening my server's bowty. "Whatever you need." The ceremony itself was beautiful, I'll give her that. Dad looked happy, if a bit overwhelmed, as he said his vows. I stood in the back, tray of champagne flutes balanced carefully, watching Victoria promise to love and cherish him. But it was during the reception that things really got interesting. Victoria, several glasses of champagne in, was holding court at the main table. "And wait until you see the house," she was saying to anyone who would listen. The marble foyer, the grand staircase. I knew the moment I saw it that it was meant to be mine. If only she knew how wrong she was. At exactly 11:55 p.m., I saw my lawyer slip into the reception hall, right on schedule. He caught my eye and gave a slight nod. It was time. I watched my lawyer, James Patterson, make his way through the crowd. He was carrying a sleek leather briefcase, the kind that screamed expensive legal documents inside. Victoria, ever attuned to displays of wealth, noticed him immediately. "Can I help you?" she called out, her professional real estate agent smile sliding into place. "Mrs. Carter Reynolds?" James asked formally, using her brand new married name. "I have some documents regarding Oakwood Manor that require your immediate attention." Victoria's face lit up. She'd been drinking champagne all night, celebrating not just her wedding, but also her apparent triumph. "Oh, Has someone made an offer? Actually, James said, pulling out a thick envelope, the house has already been sold. These are the final executed documents. The new owners wanted you to have them as a wedding gift. The color drained from Victoria's face. What? That's impossible. I'm the listing agent. All offers have to go through me. Not when the buyers work directly with the seller's agent, James replied smoothly. Brighton Holdings LLC closed on the property this morning. All cash offer, no contingencies. The deed has already been recorded. Victoria snatched the envelope, her perfectly manicured hands shaking as she ripped it open. Around her, the wedding guests had gone quiet, sensing the drama unfolding. $3 million, she whispered, scanning the documents. They accepted $3 million, but I had it listed at 3.2. The sellers were motivated, James said diplomatically, and Brighton Holdings was ready to close immediately. Brighton Holdings? Dad spoke up from beside Victoria. Who are they? This was my cue. I set down my tray of champagne glasses and stepped forward, pulling out my own copy of the deed from my server's apron. That would be me, I said clearly. The silence that followed was absolute. Victoria's head snapped up, her eyes meeting mine with a mixture of shock and dawning horror. You, she choked out. But how? Remember my mother's life insurance policy? I kept my voice steady, professional. Turns out she left me more than enough to buy my dream home. Though I have to thank you, Victoria. You were right about those crown moldings. They really are spectacular. Victoria's face went from white to red so fast I worried she might faint. You little. She started to lunge forward, but Dad caught her arm. Victoria, he said sharply. What's going on? She spun to face him. Darling, she's trying to ruin our wedding. She's bought our house out from under us out of spite. Your house? I raised an eyebrow. But Victoria, you didn't own it. You were just the listing agent. And now, I smiled, channeling her own saccharine sweetness. You're not even that. One of her nieces gasped. Another started giggling nervously. Victoria looked like she might explode. You can't do this, she hissed. We had plans. The renovations. Our future. Actually, James interjected, as the new owner, Ms. Wilson has full authority to do whatever she wishes with the property, including, he paused meaningfully, terminating any existing purchase agreements. Dad was looking between us, his wedding day joy replaced by confusion and growing understanding. The money, he said slowly. Victoria, you said we had enough for the down payment. We did, she insisted, once I got my commission from the sale, and if we took out a second mortgage, and maybe borrowed against your retirement. I watched my father's face as the full picture of Victoria's financial plan became clear. She'd been counting on bleeding him dry to fund her dream lifestyle. Here's what's going to happen, I said, my voice cutting through Victoria's increasingly desperate explanations. I'm moving into Oakwood Manor next week. You two can stay in our family home. The one Mom and Dad built together. The one you were so eager to sell. I turned to my father. Dad, I've set up a trust to maintain the house. It's yours for life. No matter what. Victoria can't touch it. You can't do this to me, Victoria whispered, but the fight was draining from her voice. Not today. Not at my wedding. Actually, I smiled, straightening my server's body one last time. I think serving you these papers is the perfect end to my serving duties. Would you like another glass of champagne with them? The reception fell apart pretty quickly after that. Victoria's nieces huddled in a corner, furiously texting everyone they knew. The other guests made polite excuses and left early. Dad sat at a table with his head in his hands, the weight of his new wife's deception finally sinking in. Victoria herself disappeared into the bridal suite and refused to come out. A week later, I stood in the marble foyer of Oakwood Manor, my manor now, and watched the movers bring in my furniture. The crown moldings really were spectacular, but what I loved most was the garden. Mom would have loved it too. Dad came to see me that afternoon. He looked tired, but resolute. "Victoria's staying at her sister's," he said, accepting the coffee I offered. "She's not taking things well." "And you?" I asked carefully. "How are you taking things?" He was quiet for a long moment, looking around at the house that should have been his, if his new wife hadn't been so focused on appearances that she was willing to bankrupt him to maintain them. "I filed for an annulment this morning," he said finally. Turns out starting a marriage with massive financial deception is grounds for that. I reached across the kitchen island and squeezed his hand. "I'm sorry, Dad. Not about Victoria, but about ruining your wedding day." He squeezed back. "Don't be. You saved me from making a very expensive mistake. Your mother," he smiled sadly, "she would have been proud of how you handled it, though maybe not of the dramatic timing." I laughed. Mom always did say I had a flair for the theatrical. "Listen," Dad said, growing serious, "about the family house. It's yours." I cut him off. "Like I said, I've put it in a trust. You can live there as long as you want. Victoria can't touch it, and neither can any future adventures in romance." He had the grace to look embarrassed. "Thank you, Sophie, for everything." After he left, I walked through my new house, all 8,000 square feet of it. The grand staircase that Victoria had coveted, the gourmet kitchen she planned to remodel, the master suite she dreamed of sleeping in. It was all mine now. I thought about her face when she realized what I'd done, the way her perfect wedding dissolved into chaos. Maybe it was petty of me to do it that way, to wait until her big moment to serve the papers. But then I remembered her smirk when she handed me that server's uniform, her casual cruelty in trying to humiliate me on what should have been a day of family celebration. Sometimes revenge is best served with a champagne chaser. 2 days later, a large envelope arrived from Victoria's real estate office. Inside was a single sheet of paper, her final commission statement for Oakwood Manor, showing a big fat 0. I had it framed and hung it in my new home office, right below the crown moldings she'd loved so much. As for the server's uniform, I had it bronzed and turned into a sculpture for my garden, a little reminder that sometimes the best revenge isn't just about winning, it's about serving it with style. Money changes everything. That's what my dad always said when I was growing up, but I never truly understood what he meant until the day my mother died and left me her life insurance policy. I was 24 when it happened. One minute I was a normal young woman working an entry-level marketing job, living in a cramped apartment with 2 roommates, and the next I was a millionaire. Mom had been smart with her investments, smarter than any of us knew. The policy was worth $2.8 million. Dad took it hard when she passed. For months, he barely left the house, barely spoke to anyone. I'd bring him groceries, make sure he ate, try to get him to join the land of the living again. Then he met Victoria. Victoria swept into our lives like a hurricane in designer heels. She was everything my mother wasn't. Loud, flashy, obsessed with status. She was also 15 years younger than my father and worked as a luxury real estate agent. "Your father needs someone to take care of him," she'd say, rearranging the furniture my mother had picked out. "And this house needs a woman's touch." I bit my tongue every time she said things like that. After all, Dad was smiling again, leaving the house, seeming more like his old self. If Victoria made him happy, I could learn to live with her constant jabs and subtle put-downs. Then came the day Dad announced they were getting married. "Isn't it wonderful, Sophie?" he beamed, holding Victoria's hand across the dinner table. "We're going to start a whole new chapter." Victoria's smile was all teeth. "And of course, we'll need a new house to start our new life. Something more suitable." Success has a funny way of rewriting history. People forget the struggles, the sleepless nights, the sacrifices. They see the end result and call it luck. I learned this lesson the hard way at our annual Taylor family reunion. My name is Marcus Taylor, and 15 years ago, I made a choice that would change everything. Back then, I was just the quiet middle child, the one nobody expected much from. My older brother David was the business genius, and my younger sister Kate was the gifted one. Me? I was just Marcus, the reliable one who helped out at our parents' struggling electronics store. That store, Taylor Electronics, was my father's pride and joy. He'd opened it 30 years ago with nothing but a small loan and big dreams. By the time I started working there at 18, it was barely staying afloat. The rise of big-box retailers and online shopping had hit us hard, but Dad refused to change, clinging to his old ways of doing business. I still remember that Sunday morning in 2009 when everything changed. The store was empty, as usual. Dad sat at his desk, surrounded by past due notices and unpaid bills. David, fresh from his MBA program, was lecturing him about business fundamentals and market dynamics. "You need to liquidate," David declared, waving his hands dramatically. "Cut your losses before it's too late. I can help you negotiate a decent sale price for the inventory." Mom nodded along, always impressed by David's business jargon. Kate was too busy texting to pay attention. And me? I was in the back room, working on something that would either save or destroy our family legacy. For months, I'd been developing a new inventory management system. Not just any system, one that could predict trends, optimize pricing, and integrate seamlessly with online marketplaces. I taught myself programming during night classes at the community college, spending every free moment coding and testing. Actually, I spoke up, my voice steadier than I felt. "I have another idea." David's laugh cut through the air like a knife. "Oh, this should be good. What's your brilliant plan, little brother?" "More clearance sales." I connected my laptop to the store's ancient TV, pulling up my presentation. "We don't need to sell. We need to evolve. Look at this." For the next 20 minutes, I explained my vision. Transforming our single struggling store into a hybrid model, combining brick and mortar service with an advanced online platform. My software would be the backbone, handling everything from inventory to customer relationships. "This is nonsense," David scoffed. "You need millions to build something like that. Besides, what do you know about e-commerce? You're just a store clerk." Dad looked torn. He'd always trusted David's business instincts, but something in my presentation had caught his attention. "How much would this cost to implement?" $200,000 to start, I said quietly. "I've run the numbers. With our current assets and a small business loan." "Absolutely not." David slammed his hand on the desk. "Dad, this is crazy. You'll lose everything. Let me handle this." I know people who might be interested in buying the property. That's when I made the offer that would change everything. I'll buy the store. The room went silent. Then David started laughing. With what money? Your savings from stocking shelves. I have some savings, I said, and I'll take full responsibility for the loans. All I need is for everyone to sign over their shares to me. Our parents had divided ownership of the store between the three of us kids years ago, hoping we'd all stay involved in the family business. Each of us held 20%, with Mom and Dad keeping 40% between them. You can't be serious. Kate finally looked up from her phone. This place is worthless. Then you shouldn't mind signing it over, I replied. I'll even pay each of you $5,000 for your shares. That's more than they're worth right now. David's eyes narrowed. He was always quick to spot an angle. What's the catch? No catch. Just one condition. You sign a non-compete agreement. For 15 years, none of you can start or work for any competing business in our market. 15 years. David laughed. You're delusional. Who'd agree to that? People who think this business is worthless, I said quietly. People who believe I'm going to fail anyway. After all, it's just luck if I succeed, right? I pulled out the contracts I'd had prepared. Simple, straightforward documents transferring their shares to me and binding them to the non-compete agreement. I'd spent my last $1,000 on getting them legally drafted. This is ridiculous, David declared, but I could see the wheels turning in his head. $5,000 for worthless shares in a failing business. Plus, in his mind, the non-compete was meaningless because there was no way I could succeed. Kate signed first, barely reading the document. Whatever. I need a new phone anyway. Mom and Dad exchanged looks. They'd been trying to figure out how to retire, and this offered them a way out. They signed next. David held out the longest, lecturing me about business realities and market forces. But in the end, his belief in my inevitable failure and his need to prove himself right won out. He signed with a flourish. Congratulations, he smirked. You just bought yourself a sinking ship. I gathered the signed contracts carefully, treating them like the precious documents they were. Maybe I just bought our family's future. The next few years were a blur of 18-hour days, endless code revisions, and countless setbacks. I moved into the store's back office, sleeping on an old couch to save money. Every dollar went into building the business. My software evolved from a simple inventory system into something more powerful. It could predict market trends, optimize pricing in real time, and create personalized shopping experiences. Major retailers started noticing our unusually high efficiency rates. By year 5, we had expanded to 10 locations, each running on my system. By year 10, we had licensed the software to hundreds of retailers across the country. Taylor Electronics had transformed from a dying local store into Taylor Tech Solutions, a multi-million-dollar retail technology company. Through it all, my family stayed away, convinced my success was just a string of lucky breaks. David started and failed at several ventures, always blaming market conditions or bad timing. Kate drifted between jobs, never finding her passion. Mom and Dad retired comfortably on the money I sent them, though they still credited David as their business advisor. Which brings us to last week's family reunion, held at my new lake house. 15 years almost to the day since they signed those contracts. David had been drinking, his bitterness amplified by the obvious signs of my success. The lake house, the cars in the driveway, the subtle but clear indicators of wealth that he'd always dreamed of achieving. You just got lucky, he shouted, gesturing wildly with his wine glass. All of this, it's just dumb luck. Real business takes skill, strategy, education. Not some homemade computer program. The room fell silent. Other family members, aunts, uncles, cousins who'd witnessed our history, shifted uncomfortably. I could have let it go, could have smiled and nodded as I had for years, but 15 years is a long time to wait for a moment. I walked to my home office, opened my safe, and returned with a yellowed document. Remember this contract you signed 15 years ago? The non-compete agreement? David's face went white. Kate stopped scrolling on her phone. Mom and Dad exchanged worried looks. What about it? David's voice had lost its edge. Well, I said, settling into my chair, there's something about that contract I never told you. Something that makes tomorrow a very interesting day for all of us. The non-compete agreement expires tomorrow, I said calmly, watching David's face. But that's not the interesting part. David tried to maintain his composure, but I could see the slight tremor in his hand as he set down his wine glass. 15 years of bitterness and resentment had led to this moment. The interesting part, I continued, is Section 7, Paragraph 3, the clause none of you bothered to read before signing. I opened the document, its pages soft with age. Would you like me to read it? Kate had finally put down her phone, her carefully maintained indifference cracking. Mom and Dad sat frozen on the expensive sofa they'd criticized as wastefully extravagant just hours earlier. This is ridiculous. David attempted his usual bluster. Some old contract from when you bought that worthless store. Who cares? I smiled, remembering all the times he dismissed me, mocked my efforts, attributed every success to luck, rather than admit he might have been wrong. Section 7, Paragraph 3. I read clearly, my voice carrying across the now silent room. In exchange for the transfer of shares and acceptance of the non-compete agreement, all signatories agree to forfeit any claim to intellectual property, patents, or technological innovations developed by Marcus Taylor during the period of this agreement. The color drained from David's face. He'd been a business major. He understood exactly what those words meant. Furthermore, I continued, all signatories acknowledge that any such developments, including but not limited to software systems, algorithms, and business processes, remain the sole property of Marcus Taylor in perpetuity. That's standard legal language, David stammered. Meaningless boilerplate. I pulled out another document, this one crisp and new. This is a valuation report from Goldman Sachs. They estimate the current market value of Taylor Tech's proprietary software system at approximately $2.8 billion. The room erupted in chaos. Aunt Susan dropped her cocktail glass. Uncle Pete started choking on his appetizer. Kate's perfectly manicured hands began shaking. But that's not the real bombshell, I said, pulling out a third document. This morning, I received an offer. Amazon wants to acquire Taylor Tech Solutions. Their initial offer? $4.7 billion. Mom grabbed Dad's arm. David collapsed into a chair. Kate started frantically Googling on her phone. You can't. David's voice cracked. We're family. We owned the original business together. No, I corrected him. You sold your shares. All of you. You signed away your rights to everything I would build, convinced I would fail. You bet against me, David. Against your own brother. We didn't know. Kate burst out. How could we know you'd create something so valuable? You couldn't, I agreed. Just like I couldn't know for sure I would succeed, But here's the difference. I believed in myself, even when none of you did. I walked to the bar and poured myself a scotch, letting the moment sink in. 15 years of dismissive comments, mocking laughter, and condescending advice played through my mind. The acquisition goes public tomorrow morning, I continued. I wanted you to hear it from me first. After all, we're family. David jumped up, his face red. This isn't fair. We'll contest the contract. We'll sue. I pulled out one final document. You mean like you did with Thompson Electronics 3 years ago? When you tried to steal their retail concept? Or maybe like the lawsuit you almost faced from Henderson Tech last year? David fell back into his chair, his face ashen. How did you? I've been watching, I said quietly. Every failed venture, every attempted shortcut, every time you tried to copy someone else's success instead of building your own. I documented everything. Why? Mom's voice was barely a whisper. Because I knew this day would come. The day you'd all realize that success isn't about luck. It's about vision, hard work, and integrity. Kate stood up, her designer dress rustling. So that's it? You're just going to take the money and abandon your family. I laughed softly. Abandon? Like you all abandoned the store, abandoned Dad's dream, abandoned me when I needed support. The room fell silent again. Even David had run out of arguments. But I continued, you're right about one thing. We are family. Which is why I've made some arrangements. I pulled out a stack of envelopes, each bearing a name. Inside each envelope is a job offer. Real positions at Taylor Tech, based on your actual skills and experience. Not charity. You'll have to work, learn, and prove yourselves. But it's an opportunity. Why would you do this? Dad asked, his voice rough with emotion. Because 15 years ago, I didn't just buy a failing store. I bought a chance to prove something. Not just about business, but about character. I handed out the envelopes. The offers are good for 24 hours. After that, I move forward with the acquisition, and these opportunities disappear. David stared at his envelope, his hands trembling slightly. And if we accept, then you'll work harder than you ever have. You'll learn what it really takes to build something valuable. And maybe, just maybe, you'll understand that there's no such thing as luck in business. The room was quiet except for the sound of envelopes being opened. Years of resentment, jealousy, and missed opportunities hung in the air like smoke. Mom opened her envelope first, gasping at the details inside. Dad peered over her shoulder, his eyes widening. Kate clutched her envelope to her chest, her carefully maintained facade cracking. David sat alone, his unopened envelope like a weight in his hands. 15 years of believing he was the smart one, the business genius, the one who should have succeeded, all crumbling in a single evening. I checked my watch. In 12 hours, the acquisition would be announced. In 12 hours, everything would change. But right now, in this moment, I watched my family face a truth they'd spent 15 years avoiding. Sometimes the sweetest victory isn't in the money or the success. Sometimes it's in the quiet moment when people finally see themselves, and you, for who they really are. The grandfather clock in the hall struck 9, its deep chimes echoing through the stunned silence. Time was ticking away on their chance at redemption, just as it had ticked away their chance at being part of my success 15 years ago. The question now was, what would they choose? The next morning dawned clear and cold. I sat in my home office, watching the sun rise over the lake while waiting for the stock market to open. In 3 hours, the acquisition would be announced. and tailored tech solutions would become headline news. My phone had been buzzing all night with messages from family members. Kate had been the first to break, sending a tearful voice message at midnight. "I was wrong," she sobbed. "I've been so wrong all these years." Mom and Dad had called at dawn, their voices heavy with regret. They'd spent the night reading through old news articles about my company's rise, finally understanding what their middle child had built while they were busy praising David's failed ventures. But from David, silence. I picked up his unopened envelope from my desk. The job offer inside wasn't just any position, it was a chance for real redemption. VP of Business Development, reporting directly to me. A role that would force him to learn the business properly, to build something legitimate instead of chasing quick wins and copying others' success. A soft knock at my office door interrupted my thoughts. David stood there, looking like he hadn't slept. His usual polished appearance was gone, replaced by something I hadn't seen in 15 years. Humility. "Can we talk?" he asked quietly. I gestured to the chair across from my desk. He sat down heavily, placing his unopened envelope between us. "I spent all night thinking," he began, his voice rough, "about everything, about why I failed while you succeeded, about why I was so sure you just got lucky." I stayed silent, letting him continue. "You know what I realized? Every time I failed, I blamed something else. The market, the timing, the competition. But you never blamed anyone. You just kept building." He picked up the envelope, turning it over in his hands. "I didn't open this because I was afraid, not of what was inside, but of what it meant. Accepting this means accepting that I was wrong. About everything." "Being wrong isn't the worst thing, David," I said quietly. "Refusing to learn from it is." He nodded slowly. "The non-compete expires today. I could try to compete with you, try to prove I could do it better. That's what the old David would do. And the new David?" He opened the envelope carefully, reading the job offer inside. His hands trembled slightly as he reached the details, the responsibilities, the expectations, the clear path of accountability. "The new David wants to learn," he said finally. "Really learn, not just pretend to know everything." I checked my watch. The market's open in an hour. Once the acquisition is announced, everything changes. If you want that position, you need to decide now. David pulled out a pen, his hand hovering over the signature line. "Why did you do this? Why offer us jobs when you could just take your billions and leave us behind?" I thought about that night 15 years ago, when they'd all signed away their rights to my future success. Because money isn't the only way to prove someone wrong. Sometimes the best revenge is giving people a chance to see exactly what they missed out on. He signed the contract, the scratch of his pen loud in the quiet office. "I won't let you down this time, Marcus." "No," I agreed, "you won't. Because this time, you're not working for family obligation or ego. You're working to prove something to yourself." My phone buzzed. Kate and our parents had arrived. I'd asked them to come early, to be here when the announcement went live. They entered the office quietly, so different from their usual boisterous entrances. Kate's designer clothes were replaced by a simple business suit. Mom and Dad held their signed acceptance letters like peace offerings. "We have about 40 minutes until the markets open," I said, standing. "Let's talk about your new roles." For the next half hour, I outlined their positions. Mom would head our charitable foundation, directing millions toward education and small business development. Dad would mentor young entrepreneurs in our incubator program, sharing the practical wisdom he'd gained from both success and failure. Kate, with her social media expertise, would lead our digital marketing division. As I spoke, I could see the change in their faces. The realization that these weren't token jobs or charity positions. These were real opportunities to be part of something significant. At 9:25, my phone rang. It was time. I put the call on speaker. Good morning, everyone. We're ready to proceed with the announcement. The family gathered around my desk as I connected to the video call. The Amazon executives appeared on screen, along with our lawyers and board members. The papers are signed, my lawyer confirmed. Ready when you are, Marcus. I looked at my family. Really looked at them. David, humbled but determined. Kate, finally focused on something beyond herself. Mom and Dad, proud not just of the money, but of what their son had built. Send it, I said. Within seconds, the news hit the wires. Amazon acquires Taylor Tech Solutions for $4.7 billion. My phone exploded with notifications. The office phones began ringing. Email alerts chimed continuously. But in that moment, something more important was happening in my office. My family was witnessing not just the culmination of my success, but the beginning of their own second chances. Congratulations, little brother, David said softly. You did it. Not luck. Not chance. You. Kate wiped tears from her eyes. We should have believed in you. No, I corrected her. I needed to believe in myself. Sometimes that's enough. Mom stepped forward, holding up her acceptance letter. We won't waste this opportunity, Marcus. We'll make you proud. I smiled, remembering that scared young man sleeping on a storeroom couch, coding through the night, believing in something no one else could see. I know you won't waste it, I said, because now you understand what I learned 15 years ago. Success isn't about luck. It's about seeing something others don't, and having the courage to build it anyway. The sun was fully up now, painting the lake in shades of gold. Outside, reporters were already gathering at the gate. The quiet moment would soon be shattered by interviews, press conferences, and the chaos of a multi-billion-dollar acquisition. But right now in this office, something more valuable than money was changing hands. Understanding, respect, and maybe, just maybe, a second chance at being a real family. David picked up his new employee badge from my desk, running his fingers over his name and title. So, boss, he said with a slight smile, when do we start? I looked at my watch, then at my family. We already have. The story of Taylor Tech Solutions was about to become business legend. But the real story, the one about a family learning the true meaning of success, the value of hard work, and the power of believing in yourself, that story was just beginning. Sometimes the best revenge isn't in proving others wrong. Sometimes it's in giving them a chance to prove themselves right.